do they have a high school that could actually, if that's the route that they wanted to go? I guess that would be a little bit more complicated, because now you're starting to think about, the potential for one central high school. And does that exist without, if they had to go out and bond and build a $20 million facility, I'm not sure that is what I would put into the practical category. Is it possible? Yes. But when you start looking at things like that, that's where I start getting squeamish.
Yeah, and remember, this is about governance. And not everybody, so we're in Bethel, but they jumped the gun. So they didn't just say, we're going to do governance. They looked at their situation. They said, we're going to skip that step, and we're going to actually bring to the voters to change schools. And so they went beyond what is being asked. And I think I've heard a lot of confusion. I was listening to a NPR interview the other day with a candidate that misunderstood this, but the idea that this is for governance, this is not mandating that schools are changing at all. So it shouldn't be about the facilities of schools, because this is about the governance, and a governance and can have 2, 3, 4, 5 schools.
Well, they have 2
in one
campuses
governance.
here, for example.
Right. But that was something that wasn't required of them in 46. They did an addition to it after they listened to students, and they realized they didn't want to wait. They wanted to have those conversations along with the vote at the same time. So that's where I want to make sure we get those confused.
I agree, but I think when we're talking about, as John called it, I don't like this terminology, the forced merger. I don't necessarily embrace that terminology. I think it was made up by people that were maybe on the other side of the issue. But at the same time, I think the voluntary mergers, I guess as we'll call them, that was much easier to try to come to a landing on that kind of issue. When we're actually going to take 2 groups that previously rejected this idea and put them together, I think maybe the facilities issue is going to play into it a little bit more. That there is going to be more of more animosity about, where are kids going to go to school, versus when they were able to work it out between themselves, it was much easier. So I agree with the governance question, but when it comes to the next step, which is sections 9 and 10, I think it is going to be a little bit tougher of a decision.
Peter,
I just wanted to quickly say, following up on Dan, union high school boards, they often work well, and in fact, there was a comment in one of the snapshots or something from a district saying, if it works so well for union high school, why wouldn't it work so well for our elementary schools? But there are union high school boards that work very, very well collectively, and they're looking after all the children from all different townships. And anyway, and they're often, we've heard, will attract new residents to go to those high schools.
So on what's practicable, I think that one area where it's not quite black and white, but almost black and white, is in the case of the MUUSDs and the NMEDs. Because they already share a union high school, and we have to remember, we're talking about governance here. We're not talking about buildings. We're talking about governance. And from a governance perspective, they've already demonstrated the ability and the capacity to work together. So it is practicable, I think, and I think we can, as we're looking at defining criteria for what constitutes practicable, I would say that's one where it's almost black and white. The only shade of gray is if there is a potential debt issue. I think it's still worth drilling down on that, but unless somebody has identified a debt issue, the presumption would be that it is practicable, because from a governance perspective, they've already demonstrated the capacity and the ability to work together.
John.
Thanks for that, Oliver. That moves it along where I think it might go is, while I appreciate Dan's suggestion about the goals, I think that leaves it ill-defined about why we can't achieve a goal, for example. I think what might be helpful for us if we want to discuss practicable is let us define what might be impracticable. Let's get clear about that. What would be the obstacle that we are willing to accord weight to that would we would say, this is not practical. One of them might be debt. But my hope would be that we would have obstacles like that are quite clear, so that there comes to be a kind of nice symmetry with practical, which is comply. There's nothing in the statute that prohibits this, or it is in compliance with the statute. The other might be there's nothing in the circumstances of these communities that prohibits the governance reorganization that's proposed. And depth might be one of them. Distance could be another. I'm not talking about distance between schools, but simply huge gaps, and the statute speaks about this. So I guess if we want to go very far with practicable, please define what in your view would be not practicable.
Well, I think where we can do that is also by studying and analyzing the report. And so when we look at plans 11, 24, 26, 28, 29, 32, and 33, the secretary has decided that it's not practicable. So if you go through and read, and if that's, so what I was thinking that we could go through, and the secretary is talking about when they see things as practicable, and then identifies plans specifically. It says they're not practicable, and for this reason.
Let's see what we can learn from
So
that.
if you want, the first one is number 11.
Krista, I think I agree with John, though. It would be a lot easier to say everything's practicable except for the following.
Okay,
It's a much easier.
We'll get there.
yeah. So let me just get a page number for you, sorry.
Like page 91
Distance and
91.
for proposal 11, that's Bellows Falls.
except for this distance and this depth.
Okay, so, and this is, again, just doing from my notes, and so if you look at that proposal, and if you go to then, page 96, it talks about accordingly, because the secretary believes that it's not practicable to require merge at this time because it would not advance the goals of Act 46. The secretary does not propose that the state board merge Athens, Grafton, and Westminster districts in the statewide plan. But the time the state board is required to issue its statewide plan in November, it may have additional information which to make a final decision. So what the secretary is saying here is it's not practical when it does not advance the goals of Act 46. So that,
Well, it actually does say, on page 95, it actually says would be possible and practicable.
Can you give us a paragraph?
Sorry, it's the penultimate paragraph on page 95.
Do you want to just point us to that direction?
Yeah, so second from the bottom of page 95.
Right.
And just for the benefit of people that are in the audience and maybe don't have a huge binder in front of them, which it's a merger of Athens and Grafton and Westminster districts would be possible and practicable, simply that existing structures by replacing 4 boards with 1 and facilitate resource sharing and elementary school choice among 3 schools. Given the size of Athens and Grafton combined, the AGM of Athens and Grafton and Westminster schools would likely provide some relief for tax rate fluctuations. It further goes on that they are exploring the possibility of merger. If approved, they would replace the 2 districts with 3 boards.
Yeah, so there's an inconsistency here because it says that it's possible and practicable, but then it goes on to conclude that it's not practicable. So there's an internal inconsistency within the document. So I think, this is an area where, I would take some exception to the secretary's proposal, because if the secretary is saying it's possible and practicable, it should be merged. So there's 2 separate questions here.
Yes, it's based on a contingent possibility, which is her decision appears to be based upon a contingent possibility, which is that the decision was ultimately made with the expectation that Athens and Grafton will continue to pursue creation of a union elementary